Check this out. Now, I got a roommate who's into Spits, which is cool. I got a big one on my wall. I've already built that. While I was building the Spitfire wing for him, I came up with this. I like it. It's got the back profile, very much of a Spit, but a different forward profile. I like it. In fact, I liked it enough that when I got to it, I stopped. And I thought, no, this is good. I'll keep this. This is going to be a nice entry for a wing. I like this. I might even fold up the very tip of it or fold it down, but I don't think I will. I think I'm going to leave it like this, make this my lift moment, and have a nice wing here. This is going to be real nice. It'll fly nice, but that is not a Spitfire. So I built the Spitfire for him. I built a couple of different P-51s for myself, and when I looked at the leavings from that, sometimes you look at the leavings, the cutouts are pretty cool. So I got these cutouts here. Well, they were just me trimming. Only this, if you really look, watch this. Watch how fast this can be. So I got this trimming. And all I did here was make a single cut. Whoop. Okay, well, watch this. Because I know the shape of a P-51. Watch this. We're going to trim that back one up. We're going to give it a nice forward tip, but not too forward. We're going to round that off and bring it around a little bit and check that out. And now what do we have? We're getting close to having yet another P-51, believe it or not. So I'm just going to take this tightly in my fingers and then try and follow this along to a point where I would actually want to see it come out. Now this is way too long a wing, profile-wise, for a P-51. And this is where some people get caught. You got to have the right proportions. For a wing this long, it shouldn't be any longer than this, guys. Okay? But we still have to do the whole symmetry thing. And when I look at this side, I knew right away it was too long. So now we've cut off that much, and we have a proper wing. Now, because it's still too long, I'm going to come inside this. This is what I was talking about with you guys. It's so easy to adjust things. And look at that. I got a nice forward tip. If I want to give it a more traditional tip, it's easy to do. Very, very easy to do, guys. And now we're just going to trim this one up to make it a nice forward style tip. You can do any kind of tip you want, and it's really easy. But as you'll notice, as we're whittling it down, it's getting smaller and smaller, right? But it's also looking more and more proportional as we whittle it down, because it wasn't technically correct, and it shows. And this is what I wanted to bring up. When you're building a scale anything, if it's not right, people will notice. It will be visual. It will be off. So right now, I'm just trying to trim this down a little bit because I don't really want it to be off. So I am nowhere near satisfied. This is too long, and the tips of this should be right here for it to be actually scale. So I'm going to take a final on this because I do know what I'm doing, and I'm going to do one of these, and I'm just going to do it around very carefully, take my fingers off there and go around. And now we're going to go from here, from where the tip should be at the earliest point where I want the tip to start, and then at the back where I want the tip to end, I'm going to come in from there, and then I'm going to round it. And it's really easy, guys. So now whether you like it or not is another matter, but in the end, you can constantly just keep fine-tuning it and adjusting it. And if you don't like that, you can take this side down a little more and give yourself a totally different kind of tip. The trick is, I actually want P-51 tips, which means I want to have them just a little squared off. They have to be. So we're going to square them off, but they also have to be a little bit rounded. So we're going to give them a little bit of rounding. And they also have to be blended. So there you go. That's closer than a lot of people end up getting, just because a P-51 tip has to include those basic elements. But we're not done yet. And as I do this, it'll just get better. Now, the trick is a P-51 should have its tip in line right about here, and the back of that tip should be right about here as it comes down. So you can delineate that just by making a few little tiny trims, guys. You can really bring that shape out, but you got to be careful. See, a P51 is supposed to have a very straight back edge. Not so much, it's supposed to be angled in. So let's now give it the correct angle. It's supposed to be pretty sharply swept. And look at that. Now we're looking more like a fighter plane. Because when you fold it out, that's what matters. Only you can see that these tips are not right. And that is really unfortunate. You can also see that this isn't right. Because if you really carefully look at a P51, it doesn't have this big, sweeping, swooping thing. It's the other thing where it cuts straight into the body and then has a nice defined little swoop coming in. That's about it. And now you're looking more appropriate to a real P51 wing, both in the angle here and here. Now that we have those two angles, because really those are the big ones, and this one, because it determines the sweep of your wing, now we come around and we worry about the tips. And I wanted to show you guys that. You could spend a lot of time messing around with these, but if you don't have your base angles right, it really isn't the big issue. Because in the end, you can have your tips kind of and just fluff it one way or the other. It won't matter if they're scale. What matters is that you make them fairly smooth and that they are tips. That'll be fine. But look at that. Isn't that not bad? That's not bad. And it does look pretty good. Now, the real trick is getting these scale is a tricky business, guys. It really is. Because getting them scale means getting them perfect, guys. And it's what a lot of people don't seem to understand. If you really want perfection, you can't just fake it. You have to make it. Which means you have to be the one to put up the pieces. Unless somebody gives you a perfect template. And even if they do, you might think that's enough. It's not. So check this out. This is kind of nice with the forward section on the tip. I like that, but it's not exactly scaled, but it is part of my scaling process because I'm making it more rounded and more of a mid tip, which a P51 really does need to be. And so now I have the other portion of this where it ain't a Spitfire wing. And I don't want it to have that rounded look. I want it to have a nice straight look. And when you fold that out, it is actually a good deal more scale than before for a P51 profile. But as always, the tips is the hard part. Now I'm showing you guys a whole bunch of tips because a P51 is a really common one. And these work. Either one of variations of these. This one's rounded edge, this one's sharp, but either one of these would work if you just wanted to do one. You can do that. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what I like to use because I find it works or because I happen to personally like it. And right there is the answer. I happen to personally like it. So I'm just going to cut those off. I'm going to round that back edge. And I like my tips for my Mustang to be just like that. Just that little bit rounded, but essentially it's a square tip, okay? Now I'm finding that back edge isn't quite rounded enough for scale appearance. So I'm gonna make sure these are perfectly lined up first in every possible which way. The X, the Y, the Z, the P. Let's get them right. And then we're just gonna come along in here. And we're just gonna very gently sweep away that little bit of excess, so that when we fold it out, it has the proper angles. And now we have roughly a nicer P51 wing, but it's really not. And if you're looking, okay, it's rounded and it's squared. Those are the two most important elements to get, believe it or not, when you're building a P51. It has to be both rounded and squared, and it's designed to be that way, but there's a reason for that. And the only thing I really have to do to make this really more scale is to make this back edge delineate a little bit more so that it's a more forward tip, but it shouldn't be too forward. This is actually pretty good. They're both squared and rounded. They're not bad. They don't look bad. They have a flat top, but they're nicely rounded. That's good enough. You could call this a P51, and you would not really be far off because the base angles are correct. And that is what you're looking for. That gives you the right taper. That gives you the right size as long as you get the proportions right here. So now, if we take a look at this, this is going to be just under 7 inches, 6 3/4. And at 6 3/4, it's pretty good. In fact, it's a little bit bigger than this one I made earlier. And you can see the difference in the tips big time here. You see how that affects the overall appearance big time? Changes big time, right? Because this back line isn't right, and neither is this front line. And let me just show you how to fix it. So the only thing wrong with this front line, for realism's sake, is that this swoop starts too early and is too big. So we're going to fix that. We're going to bring it back straight and then come up just the same and just bring it off and just take off the tiniest little layer. And I can already see that that is better. Now on this one, we don't want this kind of a sweep angle. We do, but it has to be very, very, very shallow and very straight. You don't want any kind of a swoop angle. Like I said, you want it to be straight. And then when we fold it out, we get a much more scale looking wing that will function better as well. And that's not a bad thing. So the reason is this is more resistance in the air. The bigger that is, the more resistance there is. You don't want too much resistance on the wing. In addition, this is getting closer to the proper back sweep angle and the proper forward sweep angle for a P51. But because I do know my business, I am going to bring it into about here. And I'm going to straighten that up just a little bit because it is a scale model. And I'm going to leave these tips slightly squared off and slightly rounded because that is perfect. That is the best way to represent a tip that's both square and round in RC as far as I can tell. And it works. Puts the tips up front with the squared off just towards the back, and it works beautiful. It'll be a really nice looking wing when it's on the aircraft, and it will fly this way. That will be this way. So that's good. This is looking beautiful. I really like it, and this will be a template for my P51. And now that we actually have the final, because there's always something else you could adjust for or do, we're looking at just under 6.5, which is great because it fits into my 5.5 to 6.5 so-called 6-inch series. And you can see it's a bit bigger than the old one, and I actually wanted that. I started making a Spitfire earlier, and you can see it's a good deal bigger. And so I thought if we were flying around, his will be noticeably bigger in the air, eh? Much bigger. But right now I'm making templates, and so I've got Spitfire templates of different sizes. Don't forget the one on my wall is much bigger than that. In fact, I can grab that and show it to you in comparison, just so you know I'm not full of crap, and you will see the difference. Take a look at that. This is a big difference. So his is going to be a much smaller wingspan, okay, overall than mine, but that's not a bad thing. And when you put the tips out, you see that the profile is very similar. You can match the profile very well. It's actually a very close proximity to what this one is. It's a very close scale replica made by hand. I didn't even use a template for this wing. I just know a spit wing, and I can pretty much just build one. But it is not done yet. But I did make a second one, and it has a pretty good wingspan for such a small airplane, which brings up a next point, that a small wingspan is a bad thing, you might think, like this. And it can be if I put too much weight on it and don't give it enough lift. But I'm going to show you guys how to give a small aircraft like this. In fact, I already have enough lift to make it work and to make a scale replica of a P-51 that is small, that will actually work. That was my actual goal, guys. And believe it or not, I did accomplish it. It looks pretty darn good. And in the end, now that I'm just kind of going along and making sure that all is straight and nice and true in the world, because otherwise it won't be. Making my final snips here, and when I flip it open, I can see that it is indeed just about done. I have a little rounding to do, but only on one tip, so I'll actually separate them for this and just round off the one tip really, really gently, guys. Just take the smallest amount you can until you get it right, and look at that. And that's close enough, because they're pretty much bang on precise. I'm actually going to bring this one to match that one, because I like the cut of its jib, so to speak. And like I said, whenever you do something like this, look at it this way. You are looking at 2 attempts to get what you want out of a piece of product. So, look at it that way. Look at them separately. Take one in your hand and then the other. And then put them back and forth and pick the one that you want as your one. And then once you have that, make the other exact to it. That is the goal. So at first, you just trim them both. Try and do your best to get them exactly perfect. You will fail most of the time if you're just doing it by eye. But what you're looking for is which one looks better. And when you see that, you can kind of go after it. And right now, it's actually looking pretty good, because this is not so bad, but I don't know, man. I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this, and I'm not seeing the perfect angle here. In fact, I'm seeing a little arc to this angle, and that's not what I want to see. So that means I'm going to have to trim it down just a tiny little bit more. And at the thickness this wing is right now, guys, I really am loath to do it. So I'm going to take as little off as I possibly can, because in the end, right now I'm trying to get the angles right. And that can be pretty hard by hand. It's why I recommend a template and going symmetrical, because this way, any change you make to one, you are making to the other. That is the upside. On the downside, any change you make to one, you are making to the other. So what I will say to you is separate them. Make your template first. Make 2 of them. Put them together, make them basically symmetrical. Pull them apart, take a look at them. Do your fine trimming. You see this? This one has a tiny sharp edge here. It's exactly mirrored here. That's a good sign. They are truly symmetrical. And so much so that if I put them precisely together, I can just trim that one spot, and it'll be reflected on both equally. And that is a good thing. So I've basically done this, but I can't help but feel it's just not quite right? Doesn't that just not quite feel right somehow? And I'll tell you, believe it or not, you know what the reason is? It's these angles are close, but they're not exactly right. And the tips are not exactly right. In fact, they're still too far out for the width of this wing. You have to realize there's a natural taper to this. And these wings really should only end right about here. And that is the sad part about making a template. It's about getting the proportions right. It's about getting the angles right. And since I know this wing really shouldn't theoretically come out past, say, here, I'm going to go a little bit bigger, but then once again, I'm going to be cutting the tips I have made right off the airplane. Why? Because I need to achieve the actual goal. And the actual goal isn't to have something you think is cool, unless that's the goal for you. In my case, it's to make it look pretty darn scale. and original, and have it fly stick, and I'm almost there. I have to make only one more cut because I am doing a 6-inch series, and this one was 6.5, ladies and gentlemen, and 6.5 isn't 6. And again, if you're aiming for a specific size, you'll have to do stuff like this, guys. This is looking better. This is looking more the shape I would want for my aircraft, and look at that, right at 6 inches, folks. Okay, just slightly over, and that's more like it. But that is a tiny little Spitfire, or a Mustang, or whatever we're making, compared to this. And they're really not that much different in size. But when you see an angle, this is based on a P-51. This is a Spitfire, but it's the angles that define these. And when you look at a P-51, the angles are what define its shape big time. And they have to be right. Or when you really look at it, it won't be like this. This has a curve to it now. And both those wings have that. Now, in real terms, that's a good thing for flying, for it creating lift, because it is a small aircraft. But I actually want that gone. I want any appearance of it being anything but a scale P-51 to be obsolete and gone, which means I actually need to do my tips small just like that and leave them just like that, guys, because this is the end of this video, and that would be a good representation right there of a scale P-51, and you can see it's starting to look right. This is a good way to go, and with my ailerons out to the tips, these will be great tips. This is great, guys. I could do this and it would be just fine. And at the end, my final is 5 3/4, guys. Now I won't touch it because it really is done. It's symmetrical, it's perfect, it's going to dynamically balance well as a result of being symmetrical and perfect. That's really important if you're going to make it into an aircraft. Okay, so in the last video, in this video, we've been focusing on the P-51, and I just wanted to show you why. That's one of the hardest shapes to get, guys. If you want to do a scale fighter and have it look exactly right, a P-51 is actually much tougher than it looks. So I recommend the template method. Like I talked about in the last video, what you need to do is take your cell phone, take a picture of what you want, preferably the blueprints, and you can do that. Zoom in on it until it fills your phone, turn up your brightness to the max, put a piecer over top, a paper, and trace that sucker out. That's all you need to do, guys. It works amazing, and you'll be happy that you did. I have a whole tub full of different wings and different pieces that I've been making lately. And every time I do go on a spree where I make all these pieces, I end up making a lot of aircraft. I have so many sick pieces that I've built and designed that I could show you. You'll believe me when I tell you I'm not done yet. I still have a lot of things I want to make. And I've shown you this, guys, a bunch of times, but it's because I know this one's going to fly absolutely epic, and I'm kind of saving it for towards the end of this series. But right now, it's nowhere near done. I've got a lot more coming, including some larger biplanes. Not so much. The biggest ones I'm planning are about the same size as my straight shot version 2. That being said, I find for indoor flight, you really want to keep it between 6 and 8 inches. My indoor 3D P-51 Mustang is just over 5 and say, well, it's 5 1/5 of an inch, pretty much. And that's pretty small. But it's because it's meant to fly indoors. And that is a surprising number. It's actually a little lie. No, it's hidden information. I haven't shown it yet. There's the measurement from there to there. It's just over 7. And, well, just over 7.5 from wingtip to wingtip. And it is a P-51 with the forward wingtips I showed you. But it also has the deep V-arch I showed you on the nose. And that's actually a good thing on an RC. We can bend it a little bit up and it'll give a nice lift to the body. It has a full VG kit on it, plus stabilizer kit, tail VGs and stabilizers as well. You'll see that one in upcoming videos, guys. But for now, that's it from RxD. I just wanted to walk you guys through how difficult it can be and the best way to go about it. And that way you have a template. Once you get it right, you have the template. I've shown you the things it takes to get it right and how to go about it. If you don't have it right, it's really easy to correct. Keith out.